Today's November 14th, 2021, and it's our first snowy day here in southern Michigan, the state where I grew up, and the state where this fruit is native. In fact, this is the northernmost historically native range of this fruit that you won't recognize because this is a whole rotten bunch of it here. This is pawpaw. Pawpaw is the furthest north of a tropical and subtropical huge family of plants, ancient family, Ananaceae. Genus is Asimina triloba pawpaw. And at some point I'll get to one that's a little bit more yellow, but this is all, it's gotten past the fermentation stage and it's now vinegar. So very easy for me to work through this rotten, trying to get some fruit, or rather trying to get some seeds. Now here's some seeds, they're huge. It's a large fruit. Here you can see about the size of one. This is squished. It co-evolved with megafauna. It tends to ripen on the ground. That is, it's a subcanopy tree, a native subcanopy tree, deciduous, huge leaves, grows this wonderful fruit, drops it on the ground, and then it ripens on the ground. Animals won't touch it while it's not ripe. But you know, this ancient plant family, it knows how to make things work. It had to wait for the seeds to ripen, and then you ripen the pulp, and then a giant megafauna comes by like an elephant, smashes this and swallows the whole thing. Or what probably happened here is the indigenous people carried it north as the glaciations went away, Great Lakes opened up. They would keep moving this. It's wonderful food as far north as they can make it move. So what am I doing and why am I doing it? Well, I'm wondering why everybody isn't doing this, frankly. Now, we're here, my husband and I, we retired here during the COVID era to southern Michigan. We had been itinerant for 18 years, so I could study a lot of trees, including subcanopy trees around North America. And we're here in a little rental apartment, a historically old house here, Ypsilanti. It's pretty close to Ann Arbor. It's already collapsed. General Motors, Ford, gosh, a couple decades ago they closed their plants here. This is one of the famous places for Rosie the Riveter during World War II, making the bombers here. You can still see the old stuff, and some of the areas are recovering, turning back into scrub and grass. And so frankly, there's a lot of places to be able to put in a native plant into a subcanopy recovering forest. And give it an opportunity to grow, whether you own any land or not. So I'm not only going to do that, but I'm also very interested in a couple things. One, always helping native plants move north in this time of too rapid climate change. We're, again, at the northernmost part of its range, which goes down all the way into the southern states. So this will definitely last for a while, maybe into the end of the century if we haven't reached a Endopermian type methane release with Arctic permafrost. Who knows about that? But just with sort of normal climate change, maybe 3 degrees C, something like that, it's going to be able to make it. So this isn't one of the ones that absolutely needs to be moved. But here I am in southern Michigan, and here we have orchardist Marc Boone, grows American persimmon and pawpaw. And some of his, you know, it just falls to the ground and it doesn't get picked up. He's got a U-pick orchard near Ann Arbor. So I went along, what was it, a weekend ago, and mostly went and picked up really smashed brown fruit like this. Now it was a good time to pick it up because the seeds must not freeze. Okay, so here we are in Michigan, and you know, at ground level it's probably going to still freeze a little bit, not as much as when I was a kid, but it'll still freeze. But fortunately, These seeds are so big that you can put them down 3 or 4 inches into the ground so that they won't be freezing. Put some deciduous leaf mulch that you grab around and put over the top, and they'll be just fine and come up. I don't know if it'll be this spring or late in the summer, or how much they put their roots down first before they show anything above. Plenty of opportunity here, and the good thing about these, I've read, we'll soon find out, that they are so poisonous. The seeds are so poisonous, which makes a lot of sense. If you're an ancient plant family, you make the seeds incredibly poisonous so that no rodent tries to steal them and eat them. Subcanopy, these cannot grow in direct sunlight. Starting off, an orchardist will plant them out later into direct sunlight, but when they're first coming up, no. You have to have some deciduous shade over them. But the other thing I'm very much interested in doing is these extra seeds that I'm having here. I've already got one indigenous tribal group here in the this area of Michigan, Lower Peninsula, but a couple hundred miles further north from here, who's already planting pawpaw seeds. And initially, not for the fruit, but for the fiber. It's amazing. I've actually peeled off some bark of stems that have fallen over in wild patches here. And my gosh, it just peels right off. So because the emerald ash borer has basically destroyed most of the ash here, the mature ash, the young ones will keep coming up, and then the emerald ash borer will take them down again. They're just practical. It's like, okay, what can we now plant that will be a fiber plant? But this is also just a fabulous, absolutely fabulous food plant because there's no insect. It's not like the apple trees we have around here where there's all kinds of things that will get into the fruit or that will eat the leaves so that they have to be sprayed with pesticides. Nothing. Just the zebra swallowtail. I wish I could see one before I die, but the caterpillar of the zebra swallowtail will eat the leaves, but they're not, it's not like they come in and they're a gypsy moth or something. No, it's just interacting with it. So nothing, no deer is going to come along and eat the little plant. Nothing is going to be up there, and nobody eats the fruit. I've gotten from Marc Boone some wonderful fruit earlier in the year, about a month ago, while things were still in the ripening phase. And oh my gosh, there's never anything in the fruit or on the fruit that would be like an insect or anything. They're just perfect. So, again, why isn't everybody doing this? Even if you don't own property, why isn't everybody doing this? Now, another reason why I'm doing it and planting them wherever I can and sending them up to Indigenous, which is northward, so that's good, climate adaptation, helping it move north, is that I'm a collapsitarian. I've already experienced governmental collapse and an endangered species that I work with, Torreya taxifolia, Florida Torreya. Just not putting the right kind of effort into it, but there's a loophole in the Endangered Species Act, so our group of citizens has been gathering horticultural seeds planted far north of Florida, the tiny glacial relict range there along the Apalachicola River, and we've been planting them in the north. I think we've got close to 3,000 seeds this year. We've gathered from 4 horticultural places, and I'll be getting a shipment in very soon and then distributing them out to people who will be planting them. So this is something that comes easy for me to do, but again, collapsitarian means we're not getting back to normal. And when you learn about the rise and fall of civilizations, William Ophuls' Immoderate Greatness and Plato's Revenge, political scientist, historian, and learn about the rise and fall of civilizations and the different social evolution and degradation that tends to happen in the later stages of collapse, well, we're there. We are there. And I value the people who are still trying to be the activist to change the system. But this civilization needs to go down. This industrial growth, it has to keep growing, otherwise the banks fail. Otherwise all the loans that are still out, everybody suffers. I mean, it's just... But fortunately here in North America and here over in the eastern side here where the Anishinaabe people still live, even though they lost most of their lands, there's a number of them who are recovering the old ways and trying to teach the values, not only to their own people, but the ones in academia, especially Robin Wall Kimmerer, trying to teach the values of the indigenous, that should our species continue, but gosh, there is amazing values that have been around for thousands of years and led to sustainable cultures. Not that they never did anything wrong, you know, we're humans. But there was a gradual learning that went on and a way of observing change, a way of consulting one another about change, carrying forward the understanding of the elders, but at the same time noticing changes going on, and being in close contact regionally with what was going on. So I have a great deal of respect and have been voraciously, not just reading, but in particular watching videos. Robin Wall Kimmerer, some of the other, Kyle Whyte is also Potawatomi, and I went to Michigan State University and he was there for a while, but he's now at University of Michigan. These are people who are living in two worlds. And the fear of collapse, that's settler culture, that's colonizing culture. That, you know, I'm 6th generation Michigan settler colonizing culture here in southern Michigan, 6th generation. They've experienced collapse. Worse than we're going to experience probably. It's nothing new. And they've had to live in two worlds for hundreds of years. One is their traditional culture to the extent that they were able to and allowed to, and the other one being out here in Western culture. So the ones who have been so successful at living in two worlds, like Robin Wall Kimmerer, that she went to university, she got her PhD in a science, botany, and now she's in a position where she can present not only her botany, but she can call back the culture and recover the stories and talk about the values and bring in more than just the elders. She's an elder herself, and the way she's framing things now, they're very attractive to me, and I'm learning them. So she's used to living in two worlds. I live in two worlds, and it's a shocking two worlds. I've only lived in two worlds since 2013 when my husband, Michael Dowd, and I woke up to climate change and then realized some of the trigger points of the methane coming out of the Siberian shelf. Oh my gosh. I used to live in Alaska. I used to kayak with icebergs, and I had no idea that things were shifting. So the other reason why I'm very attracted to the indigenous, it's sometimes called traditional ecological knowledge, TEK, in contrast to scientific ecological knowledge, SEK, and sometimes people bring in local ecological knowledge. That is, it doesn't matter what your ethnicity is, but if you've been living in place for a while and you've been observing the natural world and have seen the changes going on, that's important local ecological knowledge for these changing times. But I've worked in the sciences as a science writer, evolutionary ecology. In fact, this here, Pawpaw, is one of the anachronistic fruits that I wrote about in my 2001, my last book, The Ghosts of Evolution. And it was about an understanding we get through Western science, paleoecology, fossil evidence. I mean, there's wonders that we've gotten to know through science. I'm not talking about the technology for expanding life and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about creation story. That's what I did for, gosh, a good 15 years, the Epic of Evolution, of really understanding what a blip in time we are here. What an aberration this species is for incredibly what it's able to do to the planet. And yet, it's not a sense of hopelessness if your identity expands to the whole sense of life and the process of life. So long as it's not worse, this extinction, this methane release isn't any worse than the late Permian extinction that ended the Paleozoic, which was really bad. Life will come back again in 10 million years and there'll be creatures again. But if our species actually makes it through, we've got to learn. This has got to be recorded mythically, that you don't do this again. You don't put your whole emphasis on my species, getting energy out, all this stuff, my generation. You don't do that. You recover the indigenous values, the indigenous communal ways of caring, a sense of identity that's just beyond your own individuality, and where you can die a peaceful death because you know you're not just dying, you're becoming an ancestor. And ancestors were valued. Ancestors have a presence. And so, this indigenous understanding and what I've learned of Potawatomi in particular, Anishinaabe, I find very attractive, and am trying to learn more. It's a worldview shift, okay? And so living in two worlds is when I'm making the worldview shift. My husband is making the worldview shift. He's given programs where he's celebrating indigenuity. That is ingenuity, but indigenuity. The creativity, the understanding, the way of going about from indigenous cultures is the thing we need to recover. And I'm also, because I only have a bachelor's degree in zoology, 1974, Michigan State University, but I have learned so much through the years from elders, Paul Martin in particular, the great Pleistocene ecologist, University of Arizona. He died in 2010, but he would say, I'm a naturalist first and a scientist second. And what he meant by that is that science didn't just start with computer models and counting everything and having to, get the numbers and the data in order to be able to make a difference and make a decision. No, it began with what you could see with, maybe some binoculars that eventually came in, opera glasses, microscopes after a while, but basically human senses, such as the indigenous people always had, and having a sense of walking out into a forest or something that you're studying and being open to everything you're seeing, not cutting yourself off in order to start measuring this and that, being open to what you're seeing. And so, for example, one thing that I saw in studying the wild pawpaw patch, I'd never been into a wild pawpaw patch before last fall, and then majorly in this spring, in summer, recording the fruit there. But I had an insight there that I haven't read in any publication. No natural history publication of the old ones, of people looking at pawpaw. Certainly not any of the more recent journal publications, which are very quantitative. But the insight I had, and may be wrong, but it comes from natural history skills of walking into a forest and comparing it with other things you've seen. And that is, I had a sense that this wild pawpaw patch, none of the trees are any taller than 30 feet or so. That's typical subcanopy, how they operate. But I had a sense that even though the giant walnut trees and black willow, hackberry that were in there come and go, you can see them falling and come and go, because pawpaw spreads with rhizomes, its own stems, not just roots, just below the ground surface, and then pops up stems in different places. Being there, I had a sense that this was an old growth pawpaw patch. Now the stems themselves of the other trees had come and gone, floods and all this stuff, but there was something about how when the pawpaw puts its stems out and starts to grow, that when, let's say, a walnut ultimately is pushed down by winds or something, that walnut is not going to be able to have any of its nuts present babies that will establish in that area, because they will be under the shade of the deciduous, very, very dark canopy of these big pawpaw leaves. May not be so, but it sure looked to me. Pawpaw has a taproot. It has to grow on higher ground. But some of these other trees, especially willows, and so they could get their seeds and get some sun right on the edges of these pools where the pawpaw couldn't penetrate. But that was the only place I was seeing them. So for a variety of reasons, I think it was a wild, old growth pawpaw patch. And I don't know if I'll have the opportunity to explore that with others, but that's something that I also really look toward. When I went out into the field, just a couple times with Paul Martin, he'd been crippled by polio when he was in his early 20s, but he could still kind of get around until the last 10 years. It was all natural history that we were doing. And I just haven't run into people who do that anymore. There's a lot of birders who will do that kind of thing, but anyone who's like open to the whole ecosystem and works in that field. Now, he'd been able to publish in top science journals. Nature, he had a major article there in, I think, 1966 as the inventor of the overkill hypothesis. So that's another reason why I'm looking forward to, if our species survives, going back to a form of science in which the whole is taken in, and you value the elders who have a longer history of being in place, but then the young ones are along with them, and everyone's interpreting and talking. But then also, how do you make decisions about what to do? If the elders see something changing, talk about it, how do they make decisions about what to do? And I would think it would be with the wisdom that they must have used in the past. Sometimes it might be a shaman who's more in touch with the ecology than anybody else is. But I would imagine a lot of them would see something, go out and visit it themselves, maybe have traveled elsewhere or heard from other tribes of something going on similar, and then they would discuss it and make their decisions gradually about what to do, their interpretations about what might be going on, but maintaining an openness to, well, that didn't work, what should we try now? And that's what we used to have in the early sciences. Charles Darwin and his peers, when you read some of their works, I've read, oh my gosh, of course, Voyage of the Beagle, Origin of Species, they were open to geology, to zoology, to Charles Darwin. He must have gotten Chagas's disease, something from his travels on the Beagle. So he was never really well after that, but he had all kinds of correspondence with other naturalists, including Wallace as well, who came up with the idea of evolution by natural selection. So they were conferring with one another. They were sharing one another's insights. And I wasn't born into that era. But if we understand that we don't need high technology to be able to continue working at that level, then that's something we're going to put an emphasis on making sure is recovered and carries into the future. So that's natural history observation, natural history ways of interpreting. And it's very communal. And it's not limited to numbers. Numbers may be important at some level, but it's not, I mean, numbers are important to me. I'm suggesting people put these things at least 3 inches down into the ground. As with Florida Torreya, 4 inches down, because the rodents will really eat those seeds. You got to get them out of range of surface smelling rodents. But we've got that history. So to bring back natural history, it's not just Western science, now looking to the indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, but it's looking to traditional ecological values, indigenous values, and what we've lost. Indigenous ways of conferring with one another, and recovering our own early scientific knowledge, way of learning, way of understanding of natural history. That's how Charles Darwin was able to make his insights. I'm living in two worlds, which Robin Wall Kimmerer, Kyle Whyte, of course, they're living in two worlds. They have to try to function in academia, very high-level academia, and at the same time, they are great promoters of their own Potawatomi cultures of not just knowledge, but the values, the way of observation, all of those, the way of going about deciding what in the heck is going on here. Now, there's a lot, of course, in science that I really value. Anything global. Would we even know what was going on with permafrost and methane on the Siberian shelf if we didn't have our high-tech, communicative, globally communicative science? No, we wouldn't. So I'm not against all that. But this is a one-time process. And because I'm living in the two worlds of a lot of the people I deal with, think science isn't going away, think our civilization isn't going away. Well, we'll get back to normal somehow. The laws still prevail. I have to be careful with what I do with these seeds, who I give them to. I used to have to be careful, but I'm not anymore. Everything that we call public lands used to be ancestral indigenous lands, okay? And in Torreya Guardians, just in the last 2 years, 2 of our seed source areas where we've been legally sourcing seeds from horticultural plantings in North Carolina, 2 of those 3 sites there in the last 2 years have experienced private landowners who have decided to alter the landscape. Last year, there was a widow of actually the man who had taught all of us in Torreya Guardians that you don't have what the literature says, that you have male trees and female trees of Torreya taxifolia. No, you don't. It's a member of Taxaceae, the yew family. And he showed me on site when I was gathering some fruit on his property in North Carolina. He said, see, here on this tree, mostly male, but look, here are the females. And so I was like, wow, our Western science didn't know this. This guy was a retired dentist. Well, he's died, and his widow, understandably, was concerned that the Florida Torreya trees were growing so well in the full sun right next to her paved driveway that the branches were starting to overhang. And so she asked our collector, last year. He was gathering a couple thousand seeds there to cut back the branches, and he did. And we're really grateful that that was possible. And this year, oh my God, there's a grove that's almost a century old that we Torreya Guardians, the citizens, have documented in terms of fruiting there, establishment of their own seedlings and saplings. A century old, almost a century old, Harbison House in the Highlands area, the western North Carolina, the just rainiest, most perfect place for Torreya in this climate that you could ask for. And we've been visiting the site and gathering seeds. Well, ownership has changed, and the new owners came in, and by God, they just clear cut 2 sides of the grove, but they knew about the grove and that the grove was important. And so, you know, we can't get everything we want, but we're really thankful. So when our collector there went there this fall and found that, the way we turn it is that, well, this means in future years there'll be more seeds on these magnificent trees because there will be no overstory over them. Again, this is a subcanopy, and so I think these trees might be about 40 or 50 feet. They normally grow no taller than about 60 feet tall. But nonetheless, they've got liriodendron, tulip tree, way over them, basswood, and so they tend to not grow many seeds unless they're getting some direct sunlight. And so they'll have that on 2 sides. And it did mean that some of the seedlings that it had spawned off through the past decades are gone now. But the major saplings that we recorded, the big ones, are still there. So what I've learned is that if all we're doing as citizens is planting seeds on private landowner properties, it may be fine for right now, but when those properties change hands, who knows what's going to happen. And so I personally have taken it upon myself, whenever I've had a lot of seeds, to go into the places that isn't going to change hands. And that will, at least looks like, it will be managed more in an ecologically wild or recovery way, a forest recovery. Here in southern Michigan, so much agriculture, woodlots, cattle grazing in the woodlots. I mean, nothing was wild here anymore. But to put things in there so that they have a chance of carrying on, whether this culture maintains or not, that they have an opportunity to move as far north as we can get them to grow now, and at least the trees will carry on. These old ones, I mean, my gosh, pawpaw, really amazing. I mean, this is, the more I learn about pawpaws, the more I experience it. This tree has got to keep going. It's like, what an achievement. Florida Torreya has a cousin out in California I visited, not threatened yet, because it had mountains to go around and up and down during glacial, interglacial, whereas Florida Torreya had to come down, float down. Its seed often floats for about a week before it'll start to sink from the southern Appalachians. And as the cold was coming down and ice in southern Michigan, it took a fast way down as far south as it could go along the Chattahoochee River and then into the Apalachicola River. And that's where its peak glacial refuge was, just on the side that had the wind-blown wuss, and you've got some ravines in there. So that absolutely needed to come north. And at some point, maybe people in California will start. I mean, why isn't everybody doing this? Why aren't there people in California gathering the seeds of Torreya californica? They've already topped out on the northeast facing slopes of the coastal mountains of north of Napa Valley, which is about their northernmost range. they would do fine northward. California Torreya, Torreya californica. And then every tree where it's not windblown. If it's windblown, like, oh gosh, so many of our invasive plants, Siberian elm, ailanthus right out here, windblown, willow, our native willow, cottonwood, they're gonna do just fine. But anything that's got seeds like this, and especially if it's lost its co-evolved seed disperser, and so the best you have is maybe a raccoon carrying it somewhere. People just need to start doing this. Learn as much as you can. Spend some time learning the old natural history literature. Google Scholar is accessible to anybody who's got an internet connection, and a lot of what you'll be able to find there isn't behind a paywall. So you can read the scientific papers. Natural history papers in particular are very easy to read. Talk with others, and realize that whether you want to keep putting your efforts into, and I fully understand and don't denigrate it, people marching and wanting to do systemic change, certainly locally, anything you can do locally for getting more agriculture valued back in your local area, transportation in your local area, all that's important. But there's no reason to go into despair and feel that you can't do something. Anybody here in the United States can help native plants, native trees, move north. Anybody can do that. You just have to put a little time into it, and I'll tell you, it's really satisfying work to do that. So if you want to learn more about wherever you live in the country, again, for 18 years I was on the road, and so I've recorded natural history information, horticultural information, how far north a lot of trees can already live. Joshua tree. I'm doing a lot with coast redwoods right now. I'm in collaboration with citizens who are moving coast redwood, which only goes as far north as Northern California, really, a little bit into coast of Oregon, and working with the indigenous tribes up in the Washington area of giving them potted seedlings. Go forth, go plant. We know from horticultural plantings that not only can they live there, but they can send their seeds out and their babies establish with no more human help. They're fully naturalized. So, Joshua tree, coast redwood. I've done some of the conifers along the California coast that are also glacial relics. Got stuck there. No better place than the California coast with a cold coastal current coming down that during peak glacials are warmer than you have inland, and during peak interglacials are cooler than you have inland. So they could pretty much stay right there during the heating and the cooling, and there's some topographic features along the way that would have made it difficult for them to keep moving north and south along the coast. A lot of the large seeded deciduous trees, I have a program that I've done called Becoming Passenger Pigeon, and again, these are videos, these are not published papers, because from a natural history standpoint, I want people to use all their senses. And all their senses mean that I might be videoing something in a landscape where I'm interpreting in one way, but somebody who's had more local knowledge or a different way of seeing, or a Western scientist or indigenous person might look at it and go, wait, she didn't see this. Look here. So it's not just me going into a landscape, me interpreting it, but I'm showing the pictures. And in many of these places, I'm offering up the questions, and you'll see that I'm stunned by what I'm seeing in some of these places, because I'm not an expert on any of these tree species. But we know they all need to keep tracking climate warming, the drying that goes on. They need to keep tracking climate poleward. So the video series is called Climate Trees and Legacy. I've recently changed the title of it and refurbished some of the videos, and certainly the new one on various yew species in North America. Helping Forests Walk. I got that title from Wall Kimmerer, and I find that really inspiring. It's another thing that I love about the Indigenous, the kind of storytelling. It puts it not over here, like objective over here with language, but in a way of, wow, we can walk, we can help forests walk. And so, and as well from an Indigenous perspective, they've been doing this since they've been here in North America, but for the plant species that were valuable to them. So, Helping Forests Walk, Climate Trees and Legacy. If you too are interested in not just sitting around being depressed or distracting yourself, wherever you live, the native species there can use some help. And you can coordinate with a group or a single individual to the south of you, get to know, of trees that could move into your area and could already survive here now. They don't have to absolutely thrive here now, but to be able to survive here now and begin to grow such that as climate changes, they will then be able to thrive and put out seeds and seedlings in the future. You can do that too and have the seeds come up, or if you still have transportation, go visit that area. Go talk to a naturalist in that area. Go walk the landscape. And then from that, walk your own landscape. What are the microsites where this particular species could do well? Who are its neighbors that it seems to do well with? I call that indicator plants. I just wrote up a web page to help with the 1,000 Redwoods project in the Seattle area that Philip Steelstra is doing. Because of my knowledge of redwoods, both horticulturally in the Pacific Northwest and in the native ranges in California, of what are the microsites, what are the indicator plants? A list of indicator plants, if you see these in a microsite, it means it's too dry. Don't plant coast redwoods there. But if you see these plants in a microsite, it's wet enough. And so that you can plant coast redwood there. There's so much that can be done and needs to be done with microsites. Whether you have to worry about deer nibbling and eating your early browse. I know the way that endangered species management goes on with plants officially, because we've got so much deer browse and so much overpopulation of deer, protected areas where the hunters can't get into. That the deer will just, so they'll often put cages around them, and some of our planters of Torreya taxifolia also have to do that. But other planters live in places that are too steep, too forested, or for whatever reason, they don't have to worry about this tasty little yew species when it first comes up being nibbled by a deer. So the microsites are really important to understand. And that's part of what makes this endeavor so enjoyable. It's not just get some seeds, go out and plant them, but there's a lot that goes into educating yourself. And you can do that online. You can do that with folks, non-institutional folks. The institutional folks have to be very careful about what they know and what they're advocating for and all that. But people who are just naturalists, retired whatever, or young people, permaculture people and environmental educators that have been learning a lot, my gosh, there are a lot of people. So with that, I think I'll Show my seeds thus far. I've got to finish this, and I've got another mound about the same, and I've already done 2 mounds like this. I gathered a lot of rotten fruit at Marc Boone's orchard a little less than a week ago. And so I'll be finishing these off. These have to stay moist. They cannot be allowed to freeze. They cannot be allowed to dry out. And so basically, this is not something you'd put in Svalbard. Use it or lose it. I read a paper a couple years ago where it's estimated that 1/3 of the plant species in the world, I'm not talking about agricultural stuff here, but of the wild plant species in the world, 1/3 of them are what's called recalcitrant. And that means you can't freeze them, you can't dry freeze them, you can't dry them out, the embryo will die. Use it or lose it. And so for all of these seeds, it's not just somebody storing them, but it's preparing them and getting them into the soil. I've got more work to do. Fortunately, I've got people to send some of these to, and I've got some places right around here where I can put them in. Five days later, I've decided to end this video this way, right here, 10-minute walk from where I filmed in our kitchen in the little rental house. Right along there that you just saw, that's the mighty Huron River. And the floodplain park right across the way. And on this side here, we've got a very steep slope. And this slope, this is such an old city over the years, is reinforced with all kinds of building materials thrown off the edge, rocks, burnt logs, and you can see some stuff right here. So I'd already decided that this would be a wonderful slope for something. Pawpaw I'd been thinking of, they're usually found along rivers, but when I walked in a little bit here and I saw a particular indicator plant, I knew that this was the place that I wanted to plant here in southern Michigan, some Florida Torreya. Let me go show you the indicator plant. This is the indicator plant. This is a yew. Taxaceae family, same as Florida Torreya, genus Taxus. And here we are, old part of Ypsilanti. And this was brought here by a bird who ate an horticultural yew fruit from some house up there. Our rental apartment in an old house has a beautiful yew hedge out front, and what this yew indicates is that there are no deer here. This is deer candy in the winter time. Now Michigan has its own native yew, Taxus canadensis, Canadian yew, but it's a ground spreader. It stays hidden under the snow we used to have in Michigan, and therefore the deer couldn't find it and eat it. And even if they did, it would spread horizontally and bring up a few branches. But this is an indication that it's safe to plant Florida Torreya here, whereas in most wild areas in Michigan, there's just too many deer, and they would eat it during the winter time. So there are people here in Michigan helping this endangered conifer species, very ancient genus Torreya, helping it move north, move poleward, and recover from its just tiny glacial relict peak refuge site in Florida. But they usually have to keep it fenced, at least for a while, to prevent the deer, especially from lopping off the leader top of it. So, with this wonderful yew, 2 days ago I'd already put in 20 Florida Torreya seeds right on this slope here. This is not exactly wild. And today I'm going to put in another 5 near this area just because it feels so special to me here. So again, indicator plants, very important at this time of rapid climate change. This is something we all should be doing. Whether you're working with an endangered native plant or something not endangered like pawpaw here in Michigan, it's time to help them move north and thereby helping forests as a whole move north. So with that, as usual, may the forest be with you.